Sus-
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Daily Energy Markets podcast. It is the the second of the fifth, rather than the fifth of the second. It is the 2nd of May, and we have Brent crude oil trading at about a little above $84 a barrel. A little bit of a recovery after yesterday's decline. And in that regard, we need to look at what that might mean as we go forward. Let's kick off this morning with our regular commentator, Mehmet Egucu, Group CEO, Global Resources Partnership, Chairman of the London Energy Club. Mehmet, I'd like to kick off a little bit in the land of geopolitics in the question. Obviously, it seems that this oil price is draining out any geopolitical risk factors. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the story emerging overnight that US and Saudi Arabia might be close to doing this grand security deal that they had been on the doorstep of before the latest October 7 and the subsequent invasion of Gaza, which seemed to derail all of that. But here we see overnight news that indeed Saudi and the US might be on the brink of signing a grand bargain. Your thoughts on that from a regional geopolitical perspective?
Well, as you say, it's not new, actually. This is part of bringing Saudi Arabia to the Abraham Accords that Israel signed with other Gulf nations. And what happened in Gaza was a break on that. But Saudi Arabia kept its sort of solid ground, although defending always the rights of Palestinians. But they have a very healthy distance towards Hamas. And behind the scenes, they talk to Israelis, they talk to Americans all the time. And now if there's going to be a truce, a ceasefire in Gaza, although Benjamin Netanyahu says that its attack on Rafah crossing will not stop, it will go ahead. This might complicate the matters. But still, I think before the presidential election in November, Biden wanted to make sure that, especially with the Jewish lobby and influencers in Washington, D.C., he made some progress with regard to relations improving between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And it's going to have, of course, serious implications if Israel will not spoil the deal, because if it continues the attacks against the Palestinians in Gaza, and I think
they won't be part of the deal, obviously, in this initial stage, at least. Reporting on Bloomberg would indicate that this would be a grand bargain, just bilateral between Saudi and the US, and not include Israel.
Well, of course, Israel cannot be included at this stage because of what's happening, but behind the scene, that's the real reason. When you have a stronger alliance and partnership between the United States and Saudi Arabia, this is also probably a response to what Chinese have engineered a couple of months ago, bringing Saudi Arabia and Iran together. And also Chinese influence in Saudi Arabia is so strong now in many areas, not only in energy, but geopolitically as well. So US wanted to step in and make sure that it's not going to be left out at some point. And Saudi's need for strong security guarantees and also other concessions that Mohammed bin Salman is looking for from the United States, including in the military area. And so it seems that they made progress in this area, and this is going to be a new game changer. But I don't think that this will come at the expense of Chinese clout, geopolitical clout.
Yeah, a delicate balance for the Saudis to walk, in a way. If there's any language of turning your back on China, I think that would be possibly a surprise if indeed Saudi took any posture that resembled a back turn to Beijing. Malia Bengali, founder.
This is a very clever approach followed by Mohammed bin Salman. Relations with Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia's relations with Iran, China, US, European Union, other Gulf nations, Turkey, and this is part of its, I think, multifaceted approach to global relations, not putting all the eggs in the same basket. Of course, this is going to have impact also on its situation in the global market, including with Russia.
It'll be a very delicate line to cross. Can you have 4 wives at the same time? Talk to any Muslim man and tell you it's difficult. Even though you can do it, it's very difficult to keep them all happy at the same time. Malia Bengali, founder of MB Commodity Corner. Other big news overnight, of course, was our friend Fed Chairman Jay Powell telling us about the latest view from their perspective on the direction of the macro picture and the monetary policy that goes with it. What did you hear? What did you think about what he had to say? Where does it go from here?
Thank you, Sean. It was a really interesting call because the data has been moving in the opposite direction. We've seen that the economic indicators are moving down while prices paid are moving higher, which is what we define as stagflation. And interestingly enough, Powell addressed that question by saying that there is no stagflation, which sort of indicates that they're a little bit worried. The call was really very normal. I mean, he's used the same script as last time. The Fed cannot raise rates. They cannot cut rates. They're stuck right now. They're waiting for some ammunition to cut rates because the economy needs it badly, but the data is not on their side. And he's just basically buying time. So right now we can sort of argue that we had peak yields, peak REITs right now. The big question is we've now moved from 6 or 7 rate cuts down to less than 40% chance of a rate cut by the end of the year. So the market's going to price in no rate cuts. The big question really is there's been so much, nervousness in the Japanese yen, the FX markets, the bond markets, and the Fed is really just waiting for to see if the data gets in their favor to cut, because the banking and the lending, the employment index is getting weaker, but they can't do it right now. So it really was just an as you go call, but their hands are tied right now.
But they did make, sorry I did interrupt you, they did make some moves on reducing the quantitative tightening cycle. That seemed to be a significant step.
So basically in Q2, the QRA announced by Yellen needs some more. The US needs funding, and obviously because of their deficit spending. So they've reduced it. They tapered the QT by probably 35 billion, which is a bit more dovish, to just pretty much announce $2 billion buybacks to help finance that debt. So this is slightly dovish, but it's really negligible in the grand scheme of things, because obviously there's so much issuance coming from the Treasury side. They need to balance the back end yields. The US 10-year yields trading close to 4.75%. It's getting back to the 5% mark. So they're just sort of like keeping that stable, right? So yes, that was a bit more. We expect them to taper because the bond market can't take so much quantitative tightening as well as Treasury supply. So that's really just offsetting that. But in terms of real QE or cutting rates or anything else, it really just waiting to cut rates, and they can't do so right now.
Bill Spindle, senior global correspondent at Cipher News. I usually pride myself in recognizing all flags of the world, but I can't quite tell the flag where you are obviously currently located. Is that Panama flag? Where are you, Bill?
Manila.
Manila. Oh, the Philippines. Oh my God, my colleagues will be very cross with me. Seeing as you're in Manila and ultimately my favorite India watcher, what's your read so far of the Indian elections and their outcome? It seems that Modi won't get his supermajority. Your thoughts on the first few rounds of that election?
Yeah, I think it's an expectations game at this point. Obviously, the BJP and Modi are going to have a big win of some sort, but it's a question of lots of debate. Can they get to 50% of the vote? Can they make inroads in the South? How will they do in the East? All those things will go into whether this is viewed as a huge success or something showing a little sign of weakness here and there. But yeah, it's clearly a BJP sweep. It's clearly going to continue to set this Modi agenda, another step forward with another leg to run.
And in the Philippines, you're obviously there looking maybe at their outlook for renewables, for the sort of new energy and the climate challenge. What are you seeing there that may be of interest?
A little of both. Looking at climate impacts, the Philippines is one of the countries in the world that's most exposed and least protected by things like insurance. So I'm looking at that and looking broadly at coal phase out in Southeast Asia. prospects for that. Obviously, an extremely difficult challenge.
Coal phasing out. Is there any trend line that reflects that?
No, but there are a lot of efforts to try to figure it. You know, Southeast Asia has the youngest coal fleet in the world. It's mostly locked down to very long-term contracts that are forced to pay out whether they keep them up and running or not. So there are very few economic incentives, as you'll see in other parts of the world where coal is being driven out of the system. Particularly in Europe and the US for sure. And I think in the longer term, you're even going to see that happen in China and perhaps someday down the line, even in India. But in Southeast Asia, the economics of it really, there's going to have to be some other solution. And it's a real difficult challenge.
Mehmet, back to the geopolitics of the near Mediterranean. We saw also overnight, I think, or at least reported very recent, that Turkey was going to join South Africa in the court case against Israel on genocide in the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Your thoughts on that decision and where it tells us about regional geopolitical relationships?
Well, I mean, as many other countries are, Turkey is very keen on defending the rights of Palestinians, especially what's happening in Gaza. Of course, we all deplore and protest of what's happening, as well as we deplore the 7th October massacre of Israelis by Gaza. And I think the Turkish joining the South Africa in the International Court of Justice is a sign that they, as one of the largest Muslim nations in the region, and in a position to do so, Turkey is pushing forward for this case to go. And this is going to, of course, affect, even in a worse way, the relations with Israel, because before the crisis, as you know, Turkey and Israel came together and normalized relations, even that we were talking about a pipeline bringing Israeli gas all the way to Turkey and then to European Union markets. And I think it's going to take a long time for the relations to improve again. And if Israel will be indicted in the court, I think Turkey will be playing an important, but it's also somehow controversial because Turkey doesn't recognize the power, the authority of this court, because there are some cases brought against Turkey as well. So it's going to be a sensitive situation how it's going to evolve, but it will affect definitely the relations with Israel in the longer term as well. It's not just passing, but it increased Turkey's significance and prominence in the Muslim world in this sense, among the Indonesians, the Pakistanis, Gulf nations, Middle Eastern, North African nations, taking such a strong position and taking the matter also to the legal domain, not only military, political, and economic sanctions and condemnations.
Of course, it also puts... Sorry, Bill?
Yeah, you go ahead and finish that. But I was just going to have one more thing I think that's going on in this particular point in Israel, Gaza, is I think they're really trying to force Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's hand here. They really cannot make any progress with him in office and the war continuing. So they're trying to force his hand and Hamas's hand at a really critical moment to decide, do you want to carry this battle out for into another whole leg, into what's really evolving into a globally unstable situation. U.S. campuses are erupting over this. It's playing in the U.S. election. It's kind of now or never for, I think, both Hamas and Netanyahu, and they're trying to make clear that you're at a decision point. In which way do you want to carry this?
But there are also news that Hamas might be asked to leave Qatar, because the Hamas political leaders, as you know, are for a long time based in Doha. And there are news that they might be coming to Ankara, perhaps. This might be part of a great bargain between US, Israel, and Turkey as well, to bring Hamas to another location where they will be under control.
That's an interesting part of the equation when you think of it, the precipice we're on. The follow-up question I was going to put to you, Mehmet, on this, and I don't know if it's a bigger issue or not, but one to just point at is that if Turkey is on the side of the South Africans in this court case, this criminal in the Hague. Germany is on the other side with Israel. What does that do to German-Turkish relations, which of course are quite an important axis in terms of Europe, Turkey?
I think both sides understand each other, and Turkey understands why Germany is so keen to support Israel in this case for historical reasons. And I think Germans understand the Turkish position as well. And the German president actually was in Istanbul and Ankara quite recently, trying to mend ties with Ankara, because in Germany, as you know, there's such a very strong Turkish community residing and working. So it's part of the German equation. And therefore, whatever happens between Israel, Turkey, Israel, Germany, I think bilateral relations will not be seriously affected by this, because there are underlying strong fundamentals in this relationship. And but I think it's going to become increasingly difficult to sustain support to Israel at any expense, because as we have seen during the protests in campuses around the world, and also public opinion is not like the governments which are obliged to take certain position vis-a-vis Israel. And I think Turkish position is seen more not only supporting Palestinians in Gaza. I'm not talking only about Hamas, but the Palestinian civilian population, but also it's gaining some sort of a high moral ground in that regard, while most of the Western governments are supporting what Israel is doing, openly or indirectly.
Yes, which is increasingly a very compromised position. Let's get back to basics, Maliha Bengali. Oil prices have fallen $6 in the last 5 trading days. What is going on? What is that downward draft? Is it the evaporation of the geopolitical risk? It certainly doesn't sound like that geopolitical risk has gone away, listening to Mehmet and Bill there. But what is your thoughts on that sort of deflating oil price? Is it going to continue to deflate?
So it's all about demand, Sean, right? So when we had the Iran-Israel sort of shenanigans 2 weeks ago, the oil price fell on the news. So we actually don't attribute any geopolitical price premium to the price. The demand for the last few weeks on the DOE side, we've seen that demand's not picking up. We know OPEC Plus is taking about 5 or 6 million barrels per day out of the market, but demand is a driver, and we're just right now starting to summer driving season, but gasoline demand, as we saw yesterday, the 4-week moving average is much lower. So end of the day, we've always argued there is no shortage of oil. The market is holding pretty nicely between 80 and 85 because the market is balanced. But if we start seeing an economic slowdown, which is filtering from the US, China, Europe into US, because US is now peaking and slowing down, we'll see demand slow down. So like, copper obviously is right for different reasons, but oil, there is no shortage. So the key question here is, most sell-side economists are predicting a economic recovery or a growth magical, but we're seeing
is it me or has Maliha dropped out there?
So if you predict those in your model, then obviously can you hear me now, Sean?
Yeah, it's Sean? Cutting in and out. I don't know if it's mine or is everybody having the same experience. Your line seems to be dropping. Is that go ahead,
Maliha? About that. Basically, it's on the demand side. That is the main issue with
yes, I think there's a problem with the line there.
Yeah, it is, but so it's not just me then.
Step in here to say a couple of words about the US. I think because of the Fed decision to keep steady interest rates, and then the US decision to replenish its strategic reserves. You remember they sold massively in 2022. Now I think they have a formula. If the price goes down $79 per barrel and the US keeps buying, I think they are now in that mood. They started buying quite significant.
Well, I wanted to bring Bill in. I'm going to ask you, Bill, thinking that you were in New York, but in the Philippines, but still, I presume you're virtually in New York and all over the world. Where is the election intersecting with the markets, the energy markets, and the strategy, if you like? Obviously, you've got this major backdrop of geopolitical explosion, and literally, as you said, manifesting itself on U.S. campuses. But meanwhile, the U.S. economy is thundering along in perfect happiness. Where is the election intersecting with the oil markets and the possibility that intervention may or may not be called upon if you're Joe Biden?
Yeah, I mean, they certainly do not want to see any uptick in oil prices, particularly gas pump prices going in, the rest of this year. That's really critical. both directly because it's a most obvious sign of inflation, which is just remains the central, irritant in the electorate, I think. So, I think they're going to worry a lot about that. And if the prices continue to fall, yes, they'll probably move to fill some of the strategic reserve, but you can bet they'll pull back on that if it looks like that's needed. And then I think, the Fed is the other side of that, where, I think Powell is feeling closed in a little bit. I think he wants to be in a holding pattern, but you saw he made this comment about not raising rates. I think they'd like to.
I would actually say his some of his most animated comments in the press conference, I don't know if you listened to it, but I did this morning, was when he was asked about political intervention, the perception of intervening in the election cycle. And he was like, oh, no, we would never do that. And all these reasons why we'd never do that. And he sort of seemed to hit that ball a few times, when really all the other answers he just hit once.
Mm-hmm.
I think they would like to establish a direction after this June meeting. I think that, they're going to hold through that, but I think they'd like to establish a direction so that they're not in a position, clearly seeming to take sides, helping Biden if they're lowering rates, hurting Biden, helping Trump if they raise rates. I think they'd like to avoid that. I'm not sure they're going to be able to. You'd have to see a downtick, and that they still have to look at the numbers, and we have to see how the numbers come in. And that last little bit of inflation down to 2% is really proving sticky and difficult.
Let's go to the survey question and see what the view in the room is on that. Is Brent more likely to hit $80 first or $90 first? I mean, it hit 90 just a few minutes ago, it seems, in last week or so, and but it does seem to have a downward draft in it at the moment. Is Brent more likely to hit 80 next or 90 next, for first, whichever way you want to phrase it? But is there more downward draft, I suppose, in this oil price? And I think that's really where one has to take the view on. Malia, your thoughts on where we go? I mean, the decision by Powell not to proceed, or by the Fed, the cuts are nowhere in the immediate horizon, is ultimately because the economy is doing quite well, and not just sort of a stagflation scenario. You've got growth, you've got full employment. I mean, leave rates at 5% forever. Why do you need to cut them at all?
You're absolutely right. There is no need to cut them. In fact, you can argue, could they even raise? Having said that, labor market's strong. It's showing signs of slowing down. We've seen sort of the job openings in the quits sort of fall, which is quite negative. But the labor market unemployment is less than 4%. So they really don't need to do anything. What's more concerning is that if you, going back to the survey question, we think oil could probably hit 80 before 90, because if the economy is slowing down because the massive fiscal spend on Bidenomics, it's showing signs of peaking and slowing down. So if you can assume that demand stays soggy or soft for the next quarter, and we don't see a pickup, the U.S. consumer is really strained. You're seeing maximum credit card delinquencies, auto loans, the consumer strapped out. So where is that spending power going to come from? So if demand in the economy is weak, or at least weakening from a very robust level, then oil price would go low as well. To the detriment of the Fed, I mean, the OPEC should really, if they did actually release the oil price traded in 50 to 60, the Fed would be much happier, right? Inflation would not be an issue. So there's this two sort of way dilemma for the Fed, but they cannot raise rates because you see what happened in the Japanese yen market and the currency markets. They're just holding and staying sort of standing the ground to hope that, things sort of, work their way. But in our view, we think that the labor market could show a very nasty print in the next few months, because every company is laying off their employees right now. So there's a big disconnect between the BLS data and the home survey and the household survey. So if we do see a negative job market report in the next few months, or maybe even tomorrow, that would give the ammunition for the Fed to cut. So until then, you're right. There is no reason for them to cut.
Mehmet, I wanted to get your thoughts on another story this week, which was the deal for LNG from ExxonMobil, Qatar, into Turkey. Your thoughts on that, and what it tells us about that regional relationship?
Well, it has a geopolitical story behind it as well, I must say, because as you know, Turkey imports 98% of its natural gas, and 30% of this is in LNG received from Qatar, Algeria, and other countries, Oman. And now this deal,
but also heavily dependent on Russia too, right?
Well, 40% of its
not for LNG, but for pipeline gas.
Yes, pipeline gas is about 40% of Turkey's natural gas import. Therefore, There was a statement also from the US State Department expecting countries in the region, meaning Turkey as well, to reduce dependence on Russia and increase trade with US as European Union countries are doing. So now this deal, about 2.5 million tons per year, $1.1 billion and 10-year period, I believe that it has a couple of elements. One is that US is pushing Turkey hard to reduce its dependence on Russia. And secondly, Qatar is a partner, of course, in this Golden Pass field where the LNG will come. And Turkish-Qatari relations are very strong. President Erdogan can never say no to Emir Tamim and Thani. Therefore, Qatar element is very important. And then this is going to sour relations with Russia somehow, because the contract is going to come up with Iran and Russia expiring 2025 and 2026. And Turkey's hand will be strengthened this way. I have alternatives because LNG and pipeline prices are converging somehow. And this is also part of Turkish diversification strategy. But this will have some influence in terms of how relations with Russia will evolve and with the US as well. It may come at the expense of Turkish relations with Moscow. Because this heavy dependence will be broken. It's not only natural gas, oil, coal, as well as nuclear. Turkey's first nuclear power plant in Akkuyu are being built by Rosatom, the Russian company. And therefore, Turkey is diversifying, but also changing its geopolitical relations somehow in tune with the West, seeing that there isn't much to expect from Russia, China, or Iran, where Turkey was getting close to in geopolitical relations. So there will be some, I think, breakthroughs in relations. We should expect that. As happened with, in the beginning, you said Saudi Arabia, US making a late last night deal, which will change the geopolitics in the region somehow. I think the same is happening gradually between Turkey and the United States, where Turkey had high expectations financially, economically, but as well as security-wise, like F-16, F-35 deals.
Well, it certainly will be interesting, and this isn't the opportunity really to go too deep into it, but maybe we'll have you back and do a halftime talk about how different the geopolitical positioning of Erdogan will be in his latest term in office, if indeed these are all part of some new departures. Bill, I wanted to give the last word to you just to pick up on what you said earlier and sort of tie some strings together vis-a-vis the kind of poker game between Biden, Hamas, Netanyahu, and sort of boxing him in. But ultimately, it seems a lot of these things are going to be defined about how much muscle Biden is willing to put on the table here. I think we saw, although it never revealed fully, that Biden put some muscle on the table to close down the Iran-Israel face-off. He wasn't going to participate in a retaliation. He was, played a heavy part in making sure none of those drones got through and all of that. But where do you think Biden's at vis-a-vis this, muscular willingness to use the leverage, obviously, of his office, and at the same token, behind his back, he's got a U.S. election to deal with?
Yeah, well, I think the problem he's got is he has a lot of leverage with Saudi Arabia. He can offer them things they really want, and he can get to a deal there. He has very little leverage over Netanyahu, partly because Netanyahu's whole political career depends on this situation continuing in many ways, because once it calms down, there's going to be an election that he's not likely to win. So I think that's what they're trying to do, is force this to a point where he has to choose, where Hamas has to choose. Do you want to carry this out into a whole different realm where, Israel's going to wind up more isolated, Hamas might truly get eliminated or something close to it? Or do you want to extend this to another situation? But he can't, it's hard to push on Netanyahu, because to the extent he does what Biden would like him to do, he's likely to be gone and perhaps even in jail.
And where does that play out domestically into the election? I mean, in terms of, is there a convergence between these decisions and the election strategy, re-election strategy?
Well, I just think that the Biden administration just wants this to calm down. It's turning into a real, it's just a complete nightmare in a place like Michigan, where, he just critically needs to win Michigan and probably couldn't, well, almost very likely couldn't do it right at this moment. given the large Arab American community there, given the dynamics of, the campuses there. So they just want this to calm down, and hopefully they can put it in the rearview mirror by, Labor Day, and as we go, which is early September, and then as you get into the, the part of the election where real people start to actually pay attention to what's going on. If they can't put it to bed by then, at least in some form, it's going to turn into a true electoral nightmare, not just in Michigan, where it's not going to go away, but in some of these other states, they absolutely have to win as well. So they just want to
with
get
with the clampdowns you're seeing on the U.S. campuses, the clampdowns you're seeing on the U.S. campuses, and my son is at Columbia, and we get the daily updates there. It's I think he's losing a lot of votes there, and he's going to have to get a bit more muscular on this equation.
Yeah, it's metastasizing into other issues.
Yeah, exactly. Listen, we're going to have to wrap it up there. Is Bren more likely to hit 80 or 90? First, in this room, at least, it's 80 overwhelmingly. That's much more bearish than I would think. But let's see. Certainly, the OPEC oil producers won't be happy to see that, given their meeting in a few weeks' time, and would like to see oil comfortably sitting in the mid to high 80s to allow for a no change. We'll have to expect that and see. We're on a precipice, as you said, I think, Bill, earlier, with this decision in Israel, Hamas, America, US. It's either goes into the total Armageddon nightmare of an invasion of Rafah, or there is some kind of a deal and a pathway towards peace. Let's hope it's the latter, because the former would just be horrific to think about. It's already too much horrific to think about. Mehmet Ogucu in Istanbul, thank you so much. As always, Malia Bengali in London, and of course, Bill Spindle, our correspondent in the Philippines today. Thank you so much for your words and insights. Look forward to catching up with you all again soon. All the best. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.